Imagine a world where men stepped up and answered God's call to reach their full potential. Imagine a world where men put their faith and trust in God unwaveringly and without qualification. Imagine a world where men lived out God's purpose for them in everything they do. It's Not My Credit to Take explores the awe and wonder of how God shows up in the lives of strong, principled Christian men from all walks of life. Get ready to laugh, to cry, and to be transformed. I'm your host, Dr. Ed Slover, faithful husband, loving father, loyal friend, and unapologetically Christian. Welcome to the It's Not My Credit to Take podcast.
Coach Jon, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. I love that intro there, and I'm excited for this project. So I think it's needed in this space.
Thank you very much. Interestingly, everyone I've spoken to about it loves the idea. There really is an appetite for having these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, with all the different things that have been taking place in the world, one of the realizations we probably are coming to, or maybe we already knew, but it's just really putting it in the forefront of our mind, is that all of the institutions that humans have set up that we sort of look to save us, that turns out they're not going to, and they're all corrupt. Just lob that one out there.
That's right. As the youth of America would say, no cap.
Yes.
My guest today is Jon McLernon. I first met Jon when I was a guest on his podcast, Between the Before and After, and he returned the favor as a guest on my other podcast, the Quest for Life podcast. Coach Jon, as he's known, is the founder of Freedom Nutrition Coaching, where he teaches people how to lose between 50 and 80 or more pounds and reverse engineer their own lifestyle without diets. His approach is to focus on brain-driven weight loss by marrying the science of metabolism with the psychology of behavior change and the compassion of human connection to create life-changing transformations for his clients. Prior to entering the nutrition and weight loss coaching space, Jon spent Listen to this. This is awesome. Jon spent time as a nanotechnology research chemist, a Navy Marine engineer, a globe-trotting nomad, a power line technician, an oil field heavy equipment operator, and he's also the creator and host of the Between the Before and After podcast. In addition, he survived an attempted murder where he was nearly beaten to death in South Africa. A truly diverse background, Jon, to be sure. I'm so happy we had a chance to connect via Podmatch. And for the listeners that don't know what that is, it's basically match.com for podcasters. And that's how Jon and I got connected, and we've become fast friends.
Yeah, at the time of recording, I'm 41, and I think, man, if at 20 you'd told me this is what my future was going to look like, I would have laughed, because I had this idea in my head of how my future was going to play out. I was part with university. I was going to get my degree, maybe get my PhD, maybe be a teacher or university professor. And my life has unfolded dramatically differently than I had thought it would, and that's probably for the best.
Well, tell us a little bit about your background and how you almost lost your life in South Africa.
Yeah. So after being in the Navy for about 3 years, well, actually about 6, I guess, 3 years before I met my wife, 3 years after being married, because I joined the Navy because I kind of got bored of university, if you will. I decided I wanted a little more adventure in my life. We ended up traveling the world. We met a friend in Mexico who was South African, or someone who became a friend. Ended up going down to work with his family in a nonprofit organization they had down there. And it was during our work there that one night when I was going back, we were working on a nature reserve. And going back out there, I was going back to the cabin on our first night out there. It was a Monday night. And there was 3 guys in the cabin. And when I opened the door, I was kind of surprised to see them in there. And my brain didn't really register that something terrible was about to happen. I didn't see the 4th guy who was outside the cabin. And, when we look back on these moments, I find it so interesting. Time kind of slows down, but also is a bit of a blur. It's this strange paradox. But I remember just getting smacked across the head with a rock. And then that was like the first moment that I realized that something's really wrong here. And I was wearing a golf shirt very similar to one that I'm wearing today. And the second time when the guy grabbed my shirt and he swung this rock at my head again, the thing that I always remember was him smiling at me and saying, "Shh, as he swings at my head and smashes me across the head again with this rock. And of course I fall to the ground. Now I'm concussed, bleeding, all this kind of stuff. And the thought that was going through my mind while this was happening is, I can't die tonight. Can't die tonight because I'm not ready. And it was one of those moments that I think I was shown the difference between a cerebral Christian and one who has a relationship with God. I've got a great brain, can't take the credit. It's not my credit to take. I could recite scripture. I could share, maybe meaningful sounding testimonies and things like that. But at the moment of truth, when my life was hanging in the balance, I realized that there's something lacking. I almost feel like I think it was in Belshazzar in the book of Daniel, when the message with the writing on the wall was like, you've been weighed in the balances and found wanting. And I realized I can't die tonight. But, how do you fight off 4 guys that are trying to beat you to death?
Yeah.
And obviously I believe that divine intervention played a role in this, in my, gaining the strength to fight my way to my feet and get to where the others were. Cause I was by myself in this situation here, get to where others were and kind of go through that. It was quite a traumatic thing to go through, but I don't often talk about the spiritual side of that experience, where I felt like, I was alone in the dark, screaming for help, nobody coming, people trying to kill me. And it was almost like getting just a little tiny sliver of a taste of what hell might be like.
Were you a believer before that experience? And
Yeah.
if so, how did it strengthen your relationship with God? And if not, what bearing did it have on your decision to have a relationship with God?
Yeah. I would say I was sort of on and off kind of a Christian my whole life, in a sense. My parents are Christian. They raised me to be such, but they always said, like, we can't make this choice for you. That's the one thing we would choose if we could, but we can't actually choose it. It has to be your individual choice. And so I kind of wrestled with this all the way into my early 20s. And at university I was studying, as you mentioned, like nanotechnology, or it was inorganic chemistry, along with astrophysics, math. So just high level sciences that have a lot of atheists in there who think they figured out how the universe began. And, I would kind of go at them with these questions and genuinely wanting answers, and really, not able to get satisfactory answers. I think, that experience in itself kind of solidified for me that, there really isn't the answers in the way that men would like to interpret science. And so that helped me to, I think, have a more solid relationship with God. But then, I think I was also content to coast, if you will. Read my Bible, say a prayer, feel like I'm, I'm a Christian in my heart, and I love Jesus, love God, love the Bible. And like that was kind of good enough. If I gather with people in fellowship and we could talk about spiritual things, all the hallmarks of anybody maybe observing me might have thought that I was a good Christian, but I think there was just very clearly something missing kind of on the inside, because I was content with sort of that level, almost like surface level cerebral Christianity. Gotcha.
So today, when you talk about God, what do you talk about?
It's funny. It's like, as time goes on, and as I get older and I spend more time trying to understand this, the more I realize I don't actually know. It sounds like a funny thing to say, because, but anyone who's done maybe, for example, like a PhD program, you find out you're studying more and more about less and less, and trying to dive deeper into something, and you're really made very aware that, wow, for all that you know, there's a lot more that you don't know. And so I think when I think about God now, and I want to maybe contrast this, because I think there's maybe an impression for a lot of people in the world that God is this, I don't know, sort of angry dictator that wants to just banish people to hell. And it's, I'm like, it's actually quite the opposite. God is actually quite the opposite of that. But the one thing that God doesn't do is beat down the door to our heart. That's what a dictator would do. We're actually given the freedom of choice whether or not we would like to enter into a relationship with God. And but God, as probably one of the most famous verses that's often quoted, John 3:16, was really God's demonstration of love for us. And in my interpretation of the scriptures, I believe God and Jesus to be separate entities. They're divine, they're unified, but so I suppose I don't ascribe to the Trinitarian doctrine for those who might. I don't claim to have a grasp on the absolute truth, but I see it as such. That's how I interpret it. And so really we could say that God is love, but maybe not love in the way that we've been fed this idea of what love is supposed to look like, that it's romantic gestures and things like that. Like true love it's not about the easy stuff. Maybe it's easy to make some sort of romantic gesture that gives you a bit of a dopamine high. And it's like, this isn't true love. And I think about what, I believe it's in Philippians, but you'd think I'd actually have this memorized. But anyways, Paul calls the husbands to love their wives as Christ loved the church. And that's a love that's actually built on sacrifice. And sacrifice is actually the highest form of love, not grand romantic gestures. And so God demonstrated his love for us by offering Jesus as a sacrifice to go through that experience. And so when I say that God is love, I'm not really thinking about sort of this esoteric, hippie kind of walking through the streets, hugging everybody necessarily, but understanding that it goes deeper than that. And that's the love that we're called to participate in as well.
I completely agree. One of the things that I found surprising when it comes to love, not so much God's love, but love in our world, that it dawned on me a couple of years ago that my relationship with my wife was not built on mature love.
Yeah.
It was highly transactional, at least from my part. And it wasn't until I was blessed with that realization that I was then able to engage in things resembling sacrifice.
Yeah.
How have you experienced something like that in your marriage? And if so, how have you and your wife been able to navigate that?
Yeah. I mean, I think when we first got married, maybe like a lot of young people, we have these idyllic dreams of what marriage is going to look like, and that it's going to be this wonderful sort of dopamine high of being enamored with each other and, enjoying all kinds of intimacy and so on. And then it's like real life, like kicks you around a bit. And you go, okay, so this isn't all just like, peaches and cream, like maybe I thought it was going to be. Even though I had old people telling me it wasn't going to be that from their experience, I was maybe too pig-headed to sort of take it in. And so I found that I've been together with my wife for 17 years, and we've had to go through kind of this evolution of our own love, because we're not the same people that we were when we first got married. And that's actually something remarkable to think about. And so we had to sort of go through this maturation of our love, which is kind of a bit of a rocky, like bumpy kind of road in our marriage, as we're starting to realize, like, it's not just about doing sort of the nice, easy things. It's about being there in the hard times. And I think about, after I went through what I did in South Africa, like I started wrestling with mental health issues, PTSD, I was traumatized, binge eating, food addiction, becoming morbidly obese. And my wife stuck with me through all of that, even when I so detested myself that I insisted that she leave me. That was the state of affairs that I was in. So, almost a call back to an earlier question, you were thinking about this incident and how it might have affected my relationship with God. And, in one sense, I want to say, like, it taught me about forgiveness, and maybe we can chat about that down the road if it fits in. But I actually had a much harder time dealing with myself and the fallout of my own sort of fall from grace from being a reasonably fit, athletic young man to a morbidly obese guy in his mid-30s, wondering what the heck happened to him. And that spilled over into the relationship with my wife, where it wasn't so much about her. It was about how much I'd started to loathe myself and what I had become from what I once was, that led to me like trying to like push her away in a sense. Thankfully, she could see through that this wasn't really necessarily me talking, and she knew who I could be, what I was capable of, and refused to give up on me. And that's a very different, like, deeper, mature kind of love than the one that's just I brought you chocolates on Valentine's Day.
Yeah, no kidding. It's somewhat interesting. I don't know if this fits for you, but my wife got to mature love way faster than I did, at least in our relationship. How were you able let me start that over. How are you able to pull yourself out of such a dark place? So you have this brush with death, and subsequent to that, dealing with mental health issues, and then behaviorally binge eating to the point where you reach a point of self-loathing. How are you able to pull yourself out of that?
Yeah. There were many times when I would try to pray, and it would almost feel like I was staring into blackness, if I could put it that way. And I would think, because I was wrestling with like really powerful anxiety and panic episodes as well. So my nervous system was extremely highly stressed, and it was partly self-induced. And I would think, like, all I want is peace. Like, God, why are you doing this to me? And it's like, actually, that's kind of the wrong question to ask. And I realized, first off, a lot of this was my own doing. It was sort of my own behaviors, but really, I don't know that any of us have the power to overcome our own sort of human nature, our flesh, within our own strength. Very few people do. Some people can be, highly rigidly disciplined, but very few people. And I feel like I had to really be brought to the end of myself, because I'm a pretty capable guy. If I could say that without sounding too full of myself, I'm quite a capable guy. I did say I can't take the credit for my brain, but I had to be brought to the end of my abilities, where I realized this is something that I cannot do by myself. But I was so darn stubborn that it was like God had to really take me to the very bottom before I was like, fine, I give in. I give in. I give up. I can't do this by myself. I'm going to have to acknowledge that, like, and let go of my ego, let go of my pride, and say, I need help. And really, that was the beginning of learning what compassion is now.
So as part of that surrender, from that moment, and I know it's difficult to isolate a singular moment. So that
For sure.
period,
Yeah.
what was the time frame from the time you surrendered and admitted to yourself that you can't do this on your own to the time where healing legitimately started, where you started noticing, hey, I'm on the other side of this, and this is going to be okay? What was the time frame for you?
For me, it was probably between about 6 and 12 months. And I think this is a really prescient question, because maybe even for those who are Christians, maybe we would like the answer that, once I surrendered, it was like, it happened like a lightning bolt from heaven. It's like, there was a process. I first had to come to the realization I need help. And then it's identifying, well, there's work that needs to take place in my life. And, shifting from like all these things are happening to me and being resentful of like what has happened to me, to starting to become grateful that I've been going through these struggles to bring me to a place where I feel my need of God. And it's like, we can't really know the fullness or the full depth of God's love until we're in a pretty deep place. And then we realize, when I felt like I was the most hopeless, worthless, piece of garbage human being in my own mind, thinking God must feel the same way about me, and realizing that he doesn't, that was quite significant. But we're still physical beings. We're metaphysical, I guess. We have a soul housed in this physical body. And so I had to go through this process of understanding and learning and developing and practicing self-compassion. And what's beautiful about it is, as I began to learn that and stop hating myself, my relationship with my wife dramatically shifted as well. Because once I was able to start showing myself compassion, because as a man, like, I really struggled with any emotion other than anger. That seemed like I was known as a guy with a bit of a temper. And, anger is the safe masculine emotion. For me, I thought compassion was kind of soft and wimpy and weak and whatnot, and a threat to my masculinity. So there was obviously a lot of emotional maturity that needed to happen, and to go through this process of becoming okay with, like, compassion isn't actually about, a get out of jail free card. It isn't about saying, keep doing the things that are hurting you, but it's about, I understand why you're doing them. Let me give you the power to overcome them. So yeah, it was quite a journey.
So as you were talking, I was taking a few notes. One of the things that struck me is faith grows in the darkness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. When we're up against it, we're amid the struggle and the adversity, and that's when faith grows. I also made a note here. Now, you didn't choose the South Africa event, and so you were the legitimate victim of that.
Yeah.
What's interesting is subsequent to that, in everything that you described, you said several times about why is God, why is this happening to you?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, in some regard, in moments of darkness, God's with us, but He's not going to intercede until He can do something for us?
Yeah.
Right, having something done to us versus it being for us. Do you have any thoughts on that idea?
Yeah, I go back to, like, God doesn't beat down the door to our heart, essentially. And so when we're finally in the place that we're willing to receive help. So here's what I often think about. I have a toddler. He's 2, and I watch him try to do things. And of course, I'm much more capable than he is. I'm 41. And I think, boy, I could just reach down there and help him. But if I do, he doesn't learn anything. All he learns is that, like, I don't know how to do this. And so I think God sometimes looks down and says, well, I could intervene, but they're not actually, they're not actually going to benefit from that. Like, we still have to take steps. We still have to take actions to really learn and incorporate a lesson that's in something. And so I believe that God waits until we're at this place where we're ready to take forward steps, because there is an attractiveness to being a victim. There is an allure to that, because it gets us sympathy. But on top of that, it's almost like it gives us permission to not change, to not grow. I don't have to struggle with growing and maturing and so on. I get to be a victim and then stay in this place, and people will give me sympathy and feel sorry for me and so on. So there is like this attractiveness to victimhood. And I think as long as we want to be a victim, it's tough for God to help us.
Yeah, and just based on our biology, it's extraordinarily difficult to unmemorize ourselves. Because when we have that neurochemical groove that gets cut because of the attention we get from being a victim, it's like, what's the incentive to do anything else or anything that's unfamiliar if that continues getting the attention? So you're right. I mean, it's a testament to you and to anyone who makes the decision to say, all right, the path of more resistance here is to surrender. Mm-hmm. And then once we feel God's presence in our life, then take the necessary steps in order to climb out of that hole.
And I think if I could just interject, when we surrender, we're not surrendering to such an extent where we just lay there and do nothing.
Right.
What we're actually surrendering is our own will, our own ideas. This is what I think I should do. We're surrendering to God's direction in our lives, where it becomes, these are the steps I want you to take. But we still have to take those steps. So surrender is not just lying down in a pool of water, floating aimlessly while God steers us from above.
Yeah, it's definitely not waving the white flag. I give up. You reference compassion. Mm-hmm. In your professional life, one of your passions is helping people transform their lives by marrying the science of metabolism with the psychology of behavior change and the compassion of human connection. In thinking about that, the first two are seemingly objective. The science of metabolism is objective. The psychology of behavior change, there's enough literature out there that can point to more objective things than not. But the compassion of human connection, at least is from where I sit, is highly subjective.
Yeah.
Do you think that, whether it's self-compassion or having compassion for someone else, is akin to spirituality?
Oh, yeah. What's fascinating to me is the number of sort of spiritual parallels that I encounter in the work that I do. And it's not that I'm trying to elevate myself in the work that I do. And I very often, when I work with clients, I try to make it clear that like, I'm a collaborator. This is a partnership in terms of our work together. But the way that I like to think about compassion is, if I was to come over to your place and, it's a Tuesday afternoon and you're halfway through a giant, jumbo sized bag of Doritos and, you got a 2-liter soda sitting beside you there. And you're looking at it, you're in a bit of rough shape, So if I come to you and I say, Ed, you stupid idiot, what are you doing? Well, you know better than this. The response that will elicit is not wanting to change what you're doing. It's like, I just need to hide better before he gets here, right, what I'm doing. Right. And so from the human perspective, because judgments, and I think judgment's another interesting topic, but in this case, so judgment makes us want to, or if we feel judged in that way, it makes us want to hide our behaviors. But if I come over to you and I say, Ed, you've probably had a hard day, you're already halfway through. You might as well just keep going at this point. We mistake that for compassion, giving you a get out of jail free card, giving you an out. And that's not compassion, because I'm actually encouraging you to continue a behavior that's hurting you. And so compassion walks the middle road, really, and says, let's understand, like, you're a struggling human being like the rest of us. And there's a reason why you're doing this. And it's probably not because you're the most awful human being alive. But let's understand why you're doing this. And if we understand what purpose this behavior is kind of serving, in a sense, what need this behavior is meeting, then we can look at, creating change. So I call it like wrestle with our demons in the light, bring it to the light, because, God could smite us probably time and time again, and justifiably so, for our sin, but he doesn't. And, I think about Jesus when he, a particularly notable incident was with that woman that was caught in adultery. And according to Jewish law, she could have been stoned. And his response was, first of all, he who was without sin cast the first stone, and they all looked inside and walked away when they realized, okay, none of us fit that bill. But he actually was without sin, so he could have, and yet he didn't. But he said to her, I don't condemn you, so I'm not going to judge you in this moment here. But the second part of it, so we like that part, but the second part is go and sin no more. Don't continue doing the thing that's hurting you. And that's what compassion is to me.
I love that explanation, because what you're doing is you're bookending how people are showing up versus why they're showing up that way in the first place. And not letting them off the hook for it, but doing it really from a position of love and caring. Yeah. And that's outstanding. Speaking of the objective pieces of your passions, the science of metabolism, the psychology of behavior change. I mean, in addition to your scientific background, do you find that there is an inherent conflict, or the conflict baked into the cake, between science and spirituality? And the reason I ask that is I don't tend to find those two things I don't think they're mutually exclusive things.
Agreed.
Because God created metabolism.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
He created our brain. He created all of it. So it seems like science offers an interesting explanation as to what God created, but I don't see there being an inherent conflict. What's your take?
I think God is a scientist. I mean, all we're doing is discovering what he already created and put in motion. We're sitting here thinking we're so advanced, and we're figuring out stuff that he knew before the beginning of time.
Right.
It's taken us millennia to figure this stuff out. And so this idea that somehow science and God don't line up is, to me, it's absurd. And on top of that, I see where the conflict comes in. So for many people, we would rather think that God doesn't exist. We want to try to reason him out of existence. We can't actually reason God in or out of existence, really. But because if there is a God, then we have to be responsible for our behavior and accountable for our behavior. And if there's no God, then maybe we don't. We can just live according to however we see best. And what's fascinating to me is we would think that, okay, one true way, I don't know, it's unfair or unjust or something like that. But what it means is entirely impartial. We all have access to it. There's no 3 or 4 different ways, and one way was easier than the other way, or there's one way, and we're all asked to follow it. It's really, really simple in that sense. But to go back to the original question, I don't see God and science as being in conflict. I think that science proves the existence of God. I mean, so God is infinite, and for our finite mind, it's actually quite difficult to grasp. So, but what's kind of funny is, like, you take like the Large Hadron Collider, that they smash subatomic particles together, and what do they discover? Smaller subatomic particles. They smash those ones together, and what do they discover? Smaller ones and smaller ones. They're trying to get to the base unit of matter, and they can't, because no matter how many times you smash them together, so it's like you're going down infinitesimally small, and you're discovering that, oh, there's still something, and the size of the universe, like we think maybe it's expanding, and we don't exactly know where the end of it is because it's out of our reach. To me, God just made it that way to really speak to us of the infinite nature of God himself.
One of the things you brought up earlier, this is a stretch of a segue. I'm going to preface that.
Yeah, I like stretchy segues.
But one of the things that you mentioned earlier was forgiveness. And for many people, like trying to understand the infinite, and that being elusive to a lot of people, forgiveness is elusive to a lot of people. See how I did that?
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
And so, like, for you, in what you experienced in the darkness, my guess, and I'll have you clarify, is that you had to forgive yourself. And did you, as part of that process, did you also find that you had to forgive those that attacked you?
Absolutely. And in fact, I forgave them before I forgave myself. And a part of my story that's not really listed in my bio is that about 7 years after that incident, someone who I thought was a friend and a brother in Christ betrayed me in business and cost me all of my life savings and more, and left me with a mountain of debt. So I've had a couple lessons in forgiveness. The first one, I didn't know them. They didn't know me. Random. Didn't know me from a bar of soap. Didn't know my name. Nothing like that. And what you see, there's not, in one sense, there's not that many things that we're commanded to do, but one of the things we are commanded to do is to forgive. Now, I believe wholeheartedly that when we're commanded to do something, it's not to make our lives miserable. It's that God understands our nature, and he gives us this commandment to guide us into our lives being better. And so you would think, well, how does forgiveness, like, you're letting them off the hook? Like, no, I'm not. Now, what I'm doing, though, one is I didn't want to be angry and spiteful and just vengeful with this hard heart, just angry at the world all the time. It's exhausting being like that. So forgiving them for what they did. And kind of the way that I got to this place of forgiveness for them was to say, I wonder what happened to them. How did they get to this place in life where they were lying in wait in some random nature reserve cabin in the middle of the night or late at night in South Africa to try to smash my head in with rocks? What happened to them? How did they get there? And it's not to excuse, but it's to understand, because I don't think we're born murderers. I don't think we're born with like this desire to kill. And so when I would want to be angry and replay the incident in my head, and I would replay it with, if I knew this, I would have done this, and just plotting how I would like carry out my vengeance and I would have the upper hand and so on and so forth. All these things, we're rewriting it in our head. And then I would pause and I would try to cultivate this sense of compassion. So forgiveness was a process for me, but I would try to cultivate this sense of compassion. And, faith isn't just saying, well, I forgive you, but I hope God smites you. Like, it was, I forgive you, and I leave the judgment of that in the hands of God. Because God knows you, but I don't. God knows your heart to an infinite extent, and I do not. So I don't know why you did this. I don't know why we end up in this situation, but I'm going to leave it to God and let him decide what is righteous judgment for you for what you've done. And that set me free from being angry all the time.
I heard years ago that when we forgive others, I'm trying to think about the best way to articulate this. It's almost as if we we release whatever anger, bitterness, resentment, and independent of whether or not the other person knows that we've actually forgiven them, it's basically we're just putting all that stuff down. And there's also an interesting reality to it, in that unless the people that we're angry at, bitter at, or resentful of, unless they're in our world every day, those people generally don't have any idea that we are any of those things, or feeling any of those things about them. And even if they did know that, would they even care?
Yeah.
And so, like, your attackers, my guess is that they tried to kill you, so clearly they didn't really give a rip about you. And any anger, bitterness, or resentment you held on to was simply you holding on to it. It's sort of an interesting idea.
Well, I think it's something along the lines of, holding on to unforgiveness is like drinking poison and trying to kill the other person.
I've never heard it that way. I like that.
Yeah, that's what I think about. And so that set the groundwork for me to then go through what I went through with my former business partner, because now it's a betrayal. It's not just a random violent attack. Now this is a betrayal in multiple levels. And still, I got to forgive him. And so this is an individual that I still encounter, not on a regular basis, but I still encounter. And I don't harbor bitterness, but I know who this individual is. I know what their nature is. I know the things that they've done to others, and what was done to me has been done to other people as well. But most people don't know that. And so I had to really wrestle with this, because a part of me wanted to shout, "Can't you all see? Don't you all know?" And I realized it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's not going to change what happened. It's not going to change what was done to me. And it's almost like, again, so we lost like all of our life savings and all the money we'd invested in the business, and all that was just wiped out. But it's almost like, again, we're brought to the end of ourselves. Okay, you thought you could put your trust in money and building a business and investing and things like that, and gone. Where's your faith going now? And so it's an experience that I'm yet again grateful, because the other part of it is, okay, well, now when you got nothing left but faith, now is a time where faith actually grows, because it's like, well, how are we going to survive when all this has been taken away from us? And yet we did. Here we are, 5 years later, 6 years later, proving that God is, God is good.
God is very good. I love the way you say that, brought to the end of ourselves. I'm going to shamelessly steal that, just so you know.
Please do.
I may or may not give you credit for it.
Don't worry. That's okay.
So you're the father of a young son. He's 2 years old. Yeah. And one of the key messages of this podcast is really challenging men, particularly young men, to answer God's call of their potential, to show up in the world differently in meaningful, impactful ways. Being the father of a young boy, how do you plan on navigating that with him in light of the current cultural climate?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I say it's a tough one because it's not easy to go against what seems like an unstoppable tide. Like there seems to be a force, if we're looking at masculinity in a sense, and femininity, like manhood, womanhood, they're under attack in a sense. And it seems like you speak on social media about these things, and you risk triggering the cancel culture, the hate mob, all this kind of stuff. And you go, how do I teach my son what's right? You look at our education system, they've been hijacked as well. And it's, you have to, and I should speak in first person, have to have a firm commitment to the truth. It has to be unwavering. My son has to see this unwavering commitment to the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is. And so, well, I think about what Paul wrote. I believe it's in Romans 1. Someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but about turning them over to a strong delusion that they would believe a lie. And I'm like, I feel like we're witnessing this playing out. And so there's a really wonderful man that might actually be a good fit for the show as well. Alan Smith. I forget if it's Smith or Smythe, but anyways. And he wrote a book called Men Fight for Me. And actually, what his work is actually fighting child sex trafficking. But in this book, what he talks about, or one of the things he talks about, is authentic masculinity. And he has 4 tenets of authentic masculinity. And number 1 is they accept responsibility for actions. They lead courageously, and courageously means being willing to go against the tide, being against the mob, being able to stand for what is true when very few people want to do that. Living a life of service. And when people hear about living a life of service, they probably think about, I'm not going to do that. I'm not, we're all servants to something. The irony of it is we're all servants, whether it's money, power, politics. We are servants to something. And so why not put that service to God and to the higher good? And the last one here is like, who I am is more significant than what I do. So the person that I am in this world, and I'm not articulating it very well, I think the book, he does a much better job of it, is more important than my actions. My actions will follow the character that is sort of wrought within me.
Love that. You said Alan Smith. Alan Smythe, is that Smythe?
That's correct. Yes, and so one podcast that's on hiatus that I had, I interviewed him on it. Well, actually, I've interviewed him on Between the Before and After as well. But that other podcast, one of the things I was going to do was try to use that platform to raise attention to this issue of child sex trafficking, because I never realized how prominent it was in North America. Like the Super Bowl is it's the number 1 child sex trafficking event in North America. It's crazy to think about.
It really is an open secret.
And at the root of the problem is this inauthentic masculinity, because most of the purchasers, most of the victims are women, and most of the purchasers are men. And why is this happening with men? Why are men doing this? And it's because we don't have a clear picture of what authentic masculinity is. And we haven't, and so I need to live that and model that for my son, so that he sees it. And part of it is like showing healthy masculine affection, not shutting down my emotions, but showing him how to process them. When he's having a bit of a meltdown, not berating him for melting down, but on the same token, not enabling him, so that compassion piece comes into it again. So just our actions speak so loudly. So modeling it for him so that he sees that I'm a man of character and faith.
Yeah, that reminds me of Emerson's famous quote: "Your actions speak so loudly, I can't hear what you say." And
that's a good one. Yes,
you reference truth. One of the things that I've said for years is that the truth is stubborn and it's always enough.
Yeah.
Not coincidentally, most people recognize it right from the start. If you're lined up with the truth, it will resonate with you in a way that is spiritual. If you just don't want to buy into it, clearly that's going to elicit an altogether different response. I'll definitely be checking that book out. I'm not currently on Podmatch with this podcast yet, John.
I'll make an introduction.
I appreciate that. That would be wonderful. And you know what? I'm curious as to whether or not I'll need to be. I mentioned this to you earlier, that there's such an appetite for this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
If you were in my position in stewarding this thing called It's Not My Credit to Take. So the podcast is one vehicle. I don't know what the other vehicles can or will be.
Mm-hmm.
But feeling blessed to get to steward it, knowing that it's not mine, and that it was a gift. How would you care for a gift like this?
Well, I would say, first of all, for as getting to be a guest on the show, which I really appreciate, and just I love, it's very, what would I say, like faith stoking to be in thoughtful, meaningful conversations like this, where I think to myself, well, it's a really deep question I have to think about, and so causing us to, and holding that space. That's what I love about podcasting, is it gives us space for that conversation and for others to kind of get to almost like eavesdrop or be a part of it. But I think just in the same way that I've done, I think everyone who comes on this show will probably think of at least one other person, think, well, this would be a good fit for the show. And so I think that's one part of it. Not being afraid to share this. I think everyone who's been on the show should happily share out the episode that they got to be a part of. And it's not to elevate any of ourselves, but to say, we need to have more conversations like this. And I hope that hearing a conversation like this will encourage others. It doesn't have to be in a podcast. It doesn't have to be on a YouTube channel, things like that, but just encourage others to engage in this like kind of meaningful conversation, because there's so many ways that we can waste our time in life. We live with access to like instant entertainment 24 hours a day. It's so tempting to just fall into that trap. And it's like, no, take some time and have some conversations like this. And, I think for me, this will inspire more conversations like this.
I'm really glad to hear you say that. I'm very, very encouraged at the response thus far. And it's definitely going to be something top of mind to make sure that I don't insert myself and assume the credit, because it's just a play on words. It's not ours to take, right? So as we wrap up, thank you so much for your thoughts and wisdom and insights. This is the second time I've, I guess, been in the interviewer seat, and the third time total we've chatted. I've enjoyed every single second of it and feel very blessed to call you a friend.
Well, thank you. And it's absolutely mutual. It's much appreciated.
Yeah. Would you mind wrapping up the conversation with a prayer?
Yeah, by all means. Father in heaven, we're thankful that even in today's day and age, you are still interested in the souls of men and women. We're thankful that you continue to strive to reach them and touch their hearts and to show them that you do indeed love them. We're thankful that we have hope in a world that's often struggling and wrestling with a feeling of hopelessness. We're thankful that we have something to be encouraged in. And we just pray that we would be ever aware of our great need of thy Spirit within us to give us a light to shine before the world. And it wouldn't be our light, but it would be thy light. And others would seek what we want because they see the love, the joy, the peace, the hope that we have in our lives because of thy presence. And so we just pray that even those that would have listened to this conversation today, that they might feel encouraged and uplifted, and even just a renewing of their faith. We pray in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.
Jon, thank you for that. Thank you for the conversation. And I look forward to many more opportunities to get to engage in fellowship with you. You really are a true blessing, and I'm so glad to have met you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right. God bless. You can contact the show at itsnotmycredittotake.com. We'd love to hear from you. God bless.